The quiet town of Westbridge had never witnessed a scandal this explosive. It began on a grey afternoon when General Amelia Cross, decorated war hero, sharp-minded strategist, and the highest-ranking woman in her division, drove through Main Street on her way to a veterans fundraiser. She wore plain clothes, no medals, no uniform, no sign of rank. To anyone passing by, she looked like an ordinary woman in her late 40s, carrying the weight of discipline and dignity in her eyes. At the same time, a group of local officers stood outside a diner, frustrated after a long morning. They had reputations for arrogance, the kind of men who relished power more than service. When Amelia parked near a no-parking zone, they seized their opportunity. "Hey, lady, can't you read the sign?" one officer barked, smirking as the others watched. Amelia raised her brows calmly, replying, "I'll move the car in a moment. There's no need for hostility." But the officers weren't satisfied. They surrounded her, voices dripping with mockery. "What's with the attitude? Think you're above the law?" One officer shoved her lightly, another sneered. "Maybe a little lesson in respect will fix that." Before the gathering crowd could react, they twisted her arms, cuffed her roughly, and dragged her to a nearby oak tree. With laughter echoing, they tied her wrists to the trunk, leaving her humiliated in broad daylight. Gasps erupted, phones came out. Strangers whispered, "Do they know who she is?" Amelia stood tall, silent, eyes burning with quiet authority. She didn't beg, didn't break. But the storm building behind her calm gaze was about to shake their entire world. The scene at the oak tree quickly grew into chaos. Families leaving the diner, workers on their lunch breaks, and teenagers scrolling their phones froze at the sight. A woman tied like a criminal, her calm defiance clashing with the officer's mocking laughter. "Unbelievable," a man muttered, shaking his head. She didn't resist. Why are they doing this? But the officers thrived on the spectacle. One leaned closer to Amelia, sneering, "You're quiet now, aren't you? Not so tough when you're the one in ropes." His partner chuckled. "Bet she's just another entitled woman who thinks rules don't apply to her." Amelia's lips curved into the faintest smile, her voice measured. "You're making the biggest mistake of your careers, and you don't even realize it yet." The officers laughed louder, mistaking her composure for bluffing. The crowd, however, stirred uneasily. A teenage girl whispered to her father, "Dad, I think I know her. Isn't she the one from the news, the general who commanded the joint rescue overseas?" The father's eyes widened. "You're right. That's General Amelia Cross, Medal of Honor recipient. She saved 30 soldiers from an ambush last year." Word spread like wildfire through the onlookers. Murmurs grew louder. Phones filmed every second. Streams went live on social media. Comments began flooding in. "Do those cops know who they tied up? She's a national hero." Still, Amelia remained motionless. Her silence carried more power than shouting ever could. She knew one truth the officers hadn't yet grasped. When her name hit the right ears, this humiliation would not end here. It would ignite a storm. Far away at a military base, that storm was already brewing. At Fort Valor, a sprawling military base 2 states away, Captain Marcus Reed was finishing drills with his unit when his phone buzzed. Normally he ignored messages during training, but the flood of notifications caught his attention. Every soldier's phone seemed to buzz at once. "Sir, you need to see this," a young lieutenant said, holding up his screen. Marcus frowned, took the phone, and froze. The live video showed General Amelia Cross, his commanding officer, mentor, and the most respected figure in their division, tied to a tree like a criminal while small-town cops mocked her. Gasps rippled through the soldiers standing around. "This can't be real," Marcus muttered. But the video was undeniable. Comments scrolled across the screen. "National disgrace. That's General Cross. She deserves respect, not humiliation." Another officer stormed up. "Captain, orders?" Marcus's jaw clenched. "Get the chain of command on the line, now. If the general is being disrespected in public, this is bigger than a mistake. It's an insult to the uniform, to every soldier she ever led." At once, phones rang across offices, radio chatter exploded, and the base commander's voice thundered, "Prepare transport. We move at once." The men and women of Fort Valor weren't just soldiers. They were family to Amelia Cross. She had stood with them through firefights, through rescues, through impossible missions where survival seemed hopeless. And now, seeing her bound and mocked like a criminal sparked something deep and unshakable. "Mobilize the convoy," Marcus barked, eyes blazing. Engines roared to life. Within minutes, rows of armored vehicles lined up, soldiers climbing aboard with faces carved in fury. The military wasn't going to send a letter. They were coming in person. Back in Westbridge, the officers leaned casually against their squad cars, laughing as though they had just delivered justice. The oak tree stood tall behind them, and General Amelia Cross remained bound, her composure unshaken. The crowd, however, grew restless. "Untie her," a woman shouted. "Yeah, this is abuse," another echoed, but the officers dismissed them with arrogance. "Go home. You people don't know the full story," one barked, though there was no story to justify what they'd done. Amelia shifted slightly, her voice calm but cutting. "Every second you leave me here, you dig your own grave deeper. The law is meant to protect, not humiliate." Her words, delivered with the authority of a commander, sent a hush through the crowd. Yet the officers smirked, blind to the tidal wave approaching. Then a local reporter arrived, camera in hand, broadcasting live for the town's evening news. She recognized Amelia instantly. Her voice shook with disbelief as she narrated, "Viewers, what you're seeing is no ordinary citizen. This is General Amelia Cross, one of the most decorated military leaders in the country, and right now, she's tied to a tree by local police." The broadcast spread quickly, notifications buzzing across phones nationwide. Meanwhile, the crowd thickened. Some people demanded her release, others shouted at the officers. The uneasy laughter of the cops began to falter. One officer muttered, "Why is everyone acting like she's some big deal?" Another swallowed hard. "Because she is." Just then, the distant rumble of engines echoed down the road. Heads turned. Dust rose on the horizon. Convoys were rolling in, closer by the second. The cops still thought they were in control. But Westbridge was about to learn what happens when an entire military family comes to defend their own. The ground in Westbridge trembled as the deep growl of engines grew louder. At first, the townsfolk thought it was construction or heavy trucks passing through. But when the first line of armored vehicles came into view, the entire street fell silent. Dozens of military transports rolled into town, headlights blazing, tires crushing gravel. Soldiers in combat gear stood tall in the back, their eyes cold with purpose. It wasn't just a small detail, it was an entire unit, and they weren't here for drills. Children clung to their parents. Onlookers held up phones, capturing history in the making. The once mocking cops glanced nervously at each other, their arrogance cracking. General Amelia Cross lifted her head slightly, a glimmer of pride in her eyes. She hadn't called them, hadn't spoken a word, yet her soldiers had come. Loyalty that deep couldn't be commanded. It had been earned through years of sacrifice and leadership. The convoy screeched to a halt. Soldiers poured out, boots slamming against asphalt in perfect unison. Captain Marcus Reed led the charge, his voice like thunder. "Untie the general. Now." The officers froze. One tried to laugh it off. "Whoa, hold on, this is just a misunderstanding." Marcus stepped closer, his stare lethal. "You humiliated a decorated general in front of civilians and the entire nation. That's not a misunderstanding, that's treasonous disrespect." Gasps erupted from the crowd. Cameras zoomed in. The cops, once smug, now looked pale and cornered. Amelia finally spoke, her voice low but commanding, "Stand down, soldiers." Her words carried power, but everyone could sense she was merely controlling the fire, not extinguishing it. Because the truth was clear, this wasn't over. The soldiers weren't leaving until justice was delivered. Westbridge had never seen anything like it. The quiet main street, usually filled with chatter from the diner and kids riding bikes, now looked like the front line of a war zone. Rows of soldiers stood in formation, their rifles slung but their presence heavy, suffocating. The air itself seemed to vibrate with tension. The townsfolk whispered in awe. Are we about to see a standoff?" They came for her. They really came for her. Cameras captured every angle. Social media feeds overflowed. Cops tied general to tree. Military storms in. News anchors interrupted regular programming. Westbridge was now the center of national attention. The officers, once drunk on power, suddenly looked small. One tugged nervously at his collar. Another avoided eye contact entirely. But the one who had tied Amelia to the tree refused to back down. He spat on the ground, scoffing, "So what? She broke the law. Uniform or not, rules apply to everyone. The crowd booed. Someone shouted, "She didn't break anything. You abused your badge." Amelia, still bound, turned her eyes toward him. "You think power is measured by how much you can humiliate others? Real power is measured by restraint, by service, something you clearly know nothing about." The officer sneered, but his voice shook. "Lady, I don't care who you are." Before he could say more, Marcus Reed stepped forward, his voice sharp as a blade. "That lady is a general who has commanded missions you couldn't even survive 5 minutes in. Untie her now, or you'll regret it." The crowd roared in agreement. But the officer hesitated, pride wrestling with fear. And in that dangerous silence the entire town waited to see. Would arrogance yield, or would chaos erupt? The sun dipped lower, painting the town in a fiery orange glow, but the air remained frozen with tension. Amelia Cross stood against the oak tree like a monument, calm, dignified, unbroken, while two forces faced off, arrogant cops clinging to their fragile pride and an unshakable military unit burning with loyalty. The officer who tied her up puffed out his chest, trying to mask his fear. "You can't just roll in here with your tanks and bark orders. This is our town, our jurisdiction." Marcus Reed didn't flinch. "Jurisdiction ends the moment you disgrace the very people who protect this nation. You've crossed a line that no badge can shield you from." The crowd erupted in cheers. Phones caught every word. Amelia's name trended online, hashtags exploding across platforms, "Injustice for the General," "Respect our heroes," "Westbridge standoff." Finally, one younger officer, trembling, stepped forward. He pulled at the rope binding Amelia's wrists. This isn't right," he whispered. His hands shook as he untied her. The head officer spun on him. "What are you doing? Don't you dare!" But it was too late. The ropes fell to the ground. Amelia rubbed her wrists slowly, standing free at last. She didn't storm, didn't shout. Instead, she faced the officers with quiet steel in her voice. "You've humiliated me, yes, but worse, you've humiliated yourselves, your badge, and this community, and the world is watching." The soldiers behind Marcus took one synchronized step forward, boots slamming in unison. The sound echoed like thunder, a warning that patience was thinning. The head officer's smirk vanished, replaced by a flicker of panic. The game had changed, and now consequences loomed. The oak tree loomed behind her, its bark scarred by the ropes that had bound her wrists. But General Amelia Cross stood tall, every inch the leader her soldiers revered. She dusted her hands off slowly, deliberately, as if reclaiming her dignity before the eyes of an entire nation. The crowd leaned in, hushed, cameras zoomed. Soldiers stood in rigid formation. Even the arrogant officers shifted uneasily, their bravado thinning like mist in the sun. Amelia's voice rang out, calm yet commanding, every syllable striking like a hammer. "You wear that badge as a symbol of trust, but today you've turned it into a weapon of humiliation. Not against a criminal, not against a threat, but against someone who has spent her life protecting the very freedoms you exploit." The crowd erupted in applause. Some shouted her name. Soldiers pounded fists lightly against their chests in a silent salute. Amelia continued, her eyes narrowing at the head officer. "I didn't need to call them." She gestured to the rows of soldiers behind her. "They came because loyalty cannot be ordered. It must be earned. And when those who serve see injustice, they will not stand by. They will act." The younger officer who had untied her lowered his gaze, ashamed, while the others fidgeted under the weight of her words. Then she turned toward the townspeople. "This is not about me. This is about every citizen who fears those meant to protect them. Abuse of power is not law, it is cowardice." The street thundered with cheers. Phones captured every second, the live stream climbing into millions of views. And for the first time, the officers realized they weren't facing just a crowd. They were facing history being written against them. The officers' arrogance crumbled like glass under a hammer. The crowd, once hesitant, now stood boldly against them. Citizens shouted, "Resign! Shame on you! Justice for the General!" Phones caught every tear of fear on their faces, every falter in their voices. The head officer, red with fury, tried one last bluff. "You people don't understand. She disrespected us first. She thought she was above the law." Amelia stepped closer, her shadow cutting across him like a blade. "Above the law? No. I am bound by it more than most. But you don't even understand it. The law was written to protect, not to satisfy your ego. Cheers exploded. Soldiers behind Marcus Reed took another synchronized step forward, the street trembling beneath their boots. The symbolism was clear, the lawless would not go unchecked. Then came the sound that sealed the officer's fate. Sirens, dozens of squad cars, state police vehicles and federal SUVs stormed into Westbridge. Out stepped officials in crisp suits, badges gleaming under the streetlights. The Department of Justice had arrived. The head officer's smirk died instantly. His fellow cops exchanged panicked looks. Their small-town shield of power had been shattered by national attention. A federal agent raised his voice. By order of the United States Department of Justice, you are under investigation for unlawful detention, abuse of authority, and public misconduct. Handcuffs snapped, this time on the wrists of the very men who had mocked Amelia only hours earlier. The crowd roared, some even chanting, "Justice! Justice!" Amelia stood unmoving, her expression calm, but her eyes glimmered with quiet triumph. She hadn't lifted a finger, yet the truth had leveled them all, and the night was not over. The world still awaited her next move. The street of Westbridge transformed into a courtroom without walls. The disgraced officers sat cuffed in the back of federal SUVs, their laughter replaced by silence and shame. Reporters swarmed the scene, shoving microphones toward General Amelia Cross, begging for a statement. "General Cross, how do you feel? Do you want these men prosecuted? What message do you have for America tonight?" But Amelia didn't speak. She simply stood among her soldiers, her presence enough to quiet even the most persistent journalists. Sometimes silence carried more weight than words, and she knew this was one of those moments. Captain Marcus Reed approached her. "Ma'am, orders?" His tone was respectful but heavy with emotion, as though he too waited for her judgment. Amelia glanced at the oak tree, the place of her humiliation, now immortalized across every news outlet in the country. She placed one gloved hand against the bark, her face unreadable. Then she turned back to her unit. "Orders are simple," she said at last, her voice strong enough to carry over the hushed crowd. "We leave with dignity. Justice will handle the rest." The soldiers saluted as one, boots striking the pavement in perfect unison. Their loyalty was a wall of steel, a living testament to the respect she commanded. The crowd erupted in cheers, chanting her name, their voices rising like thunder. Amelia climbed into the lead vehicle, but before the door closed, she looked out at the townspeople. "Remember this," she said firmly. "Power abused is power lost. Stand for what's right, even when no one is watching." With that, the convoy rolled out, engines rumbling, headlights piercing the night. The tree remained, scarred but standing tall, like the general herself, a symbol, a warning.